Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Charlie's Garage. Thanks for watching again. So last video we ended realizing that I needed to do some work by splitting the cases and working on this crank seal inside this KX85 motor. So today we're going to go ahead and start splitting it and try to figure out if we can drive that seal in the rest of the way or if we're just going to need to replace it. So the biggest thing I'm worried about here is the main bearing that's attached to the crank on the clutch side. If it doesn't come out whenever I split the cases, I'm gonna have to drive it out and it's probably not gonna be reusable. So if that's the case, I'm gonna end up having to buy a set of main bearings, and I'd rather not do that. So we're hoping that the main bearing comes out whenever the cases are split and stays attached to the crank, and that this seal is good and all I've gotta do is drive it back in and not have to spend any more money on the motor for this. But we're gonna see. We'll go ahead and start pulling the clutch and getting it ready to split the cases. All right, so we spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure out how to get the nut off of the crank right here, and man, am I embarrassed to admit what happened. But the truth is that it's a right-hand thread or reverse thread, if I've got that right. But basically, you had to turn it right to loosen it, and I was turning it left. I had all kinds of crazy stuff set up, trying to get enough torque on it and get everything locked in so that I could do that, and ended up snapping the crank entirely right here. So basically the whole crank's got to be replaced now because the threads that hold on to the right side are sheared off. So I actually got a new crank in the mail already. It only took about 3 days. Got a great deal on eBay on a new hot rod crank. I really did not want to have to replace a crank because the crank that's on it is definitely in good shape, but it's always nice to be able to market it whenever I go to sell this bike as having a brand new crank. So we're gonna put the new crank in, get that seal driven in all the way or replace it if necessary, and put new main bearings on with that new crank, and this bike will have a new bottom end and top end whenever we get done with it. So anyways, yeah, just gonna keep pressing forward. Yeah, I made a mistake, but I guess it could always be worse. At least we didn't damage anything else. So 150 bucks down the drain, but we're gonna get back to work, get these cases split, so we can start working on getting this bike back together. Thanks. So I spent the last couple hours degreasing the case halves, cleaning them up, getting the bearings cleaned out really well. Got the old seals out so that we're ready to go in with the new ones. Got a new crankshaft here. Got my crankshaft installer tool, my new main bearings and seals. So I'm gonna go ahead and start driving in these new seals, get the new bearings and crank installed, and then we can reassemble the transmission. And these seals, this is going to be the inside of it, so the outside edge is going to go inwards as we're pushing it in. It's the same seal for each side of the crank case, so you don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. Now, I don't know if you can see it right here, but where this edge is, this little lip, that's what retains the seal. This was our original problem, was that this seal right here was not driven in all the way. In fact, it was about probably at least 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit more from the edge. So it had basically just not been driven in all the way, and was barely even sealing. And gas 2-stroke mix was just pouring into the bottom end from the top end, and likewise transmission oil or gear oil was being sucked into the top end as well from that seal. So that was the reason why we had so much oil in there, and that we originally were going to have to split the cases. And it is also probably the reason that the top end failed, because of all the extra pressure from the bottom end from that oil sloshing around at, you know, however many thousand RPMs when that thing was on the top end, causing premature piston skirt failure, is my theory. Because the skirts were broken off, the top of the piston was fine, and the cylinder wasn't in great shape. It was probably damaged by the piston skirt breaking off, but obviously it was runnable as it was. So looks like this was the primary reason for failure in this engine. Good to go on that one. All right, so this is our stator side. I'm gonna actually install the crankshaft in the side of the case with the transmission, the left side here first. And the reason being that I wanna be able to put the crankshaft in with the bearings, and then also get the transmission set, lubricate everything, and then I can just sit my gasket maker on the transmission half, and I'm not gonna have to manipulate it and risk anything falling out or coming loose while I'm trying to install the other side. And then the plan is to just come over with this side and use my crankshaft installer to press it on, my crankcase installer. All right, so I'm gonna get these main bearings ready to go and drop them in, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. All right, I'm gonna put the numbers facing up. See, this is always the hardest part about this to me, is trying to get them to go in evenly. I always have a tendency to get them kind of crooked. And I learned the hard way the first time I did this, that if they're crooked, if you let them get crooked the way I just did that first one, they will just end up ruining your case. So yeah, you definitely just want to, if they're not going in right, you just want to try to get them back out and start it over. Perfect. You kind of hear it. The sound changes when it's completely seated, like it did just there at the end. But we got it in there, nice and straight, nice and even. Perfect. Kind of gently knock it out. Didn't hurt the bearing at all. All right. So no longer as cold as I would like for it to be, but I'm gonna go ahead and press with it. Try to get it in one more time. Yep. And they're nice and even, good and tight. Bearing still spins freely. Get a couple more taps just to be good, make sure, but yes, it is seated. And see, I just kind of do it by hand with this bearing installer kit, bearing and seal installer kit that I've got, but you can feel and hear a difference in the sound of that hammer striking whenever the bearing is completely seated. It doesn't really take the hit the same way that it does whenever it's actually being driven in. It doesn't absorb it, it bounces right back off. The pitch of the sound is a lot higher. But yeah, they're in there nice and tight, spinning good and freely. Not notchy at all. So you just always want to make sure that you didn't damage the bearing during the process. Now I've got some assembly lube that I'm going to put on here from a certain manufacturer. Typically try to use something like this on all of my bearings and transmission parts whenever I put it back together. And this is mainly just to make sure that whenever it first starts up and breaks in, that everything is nice and lubricated already, because the last thing I want is anything dry seizing during break-in. All right, so next thing I need to do, I'm sitting here messing with the transmission. Next thing I need to do is install the crankshaft. So this is going to be the stator side, this is the transmission side. So this will come through out on the stator side. This side's going to go into the transmission side case half. All right, so we got the crank sitting there. You know, I see a lot of videos, people doing bottom ends on other projects, and it seems like most bikes you're able to just almost straight up drop in the bearing for the main bearing for the crankshaft, and they're able to just kind of pull in or push in that crankshaft into those bearings as well. There's a lot more tolerance between the two parts. These Kawasaki's, so far, every one that I've done, they are fit so tightly that it's really easy to make mistakes with the bearings, with the crank and everything like that, because it takes so much force to get them to work. Now, I don't know if the setup that I'm about to use is going to work. I'm going to try my best here with it, but basically I'm going to use the nut that goes on the crankshaft here anyways, because these threads are reverse thread, which is the reason I'm having to replace the crankshaft. I didn't realize that whenever I was trying to take this off, and ended up snapping those threads off. But I'm going to try to use this, since there's no reverse thread adapter for this crank installer. Going to try to use it to put the collar that we use with the installer on there and hold everything tight. So we're going to see if that'll work. Well, all right, try it the other way. The only real problem I see right now with this is that it might be a little bit hard to get this off of here. But if I can get this to work, it should pull the crankshaft into that bearing without damaging it, without having to hit it with a hammer or anything like that. Alright, so hopefully you can get a better look at my setup here. Not sure if this is going to work or if it's just going to spin. And it's pulling the crankshaft in. Yeah, and hopefully that's gonna be pretty even on the gap on each side. This would be a good opportunity to go ahead and squirt some assembly lube into that lower rod bearing. Okay, seems to be good. All right, so we got our crank installed on the right side, I believe it is. Yeah, the right side crankcase that holds the transmission. So now we should just be able to put the transmission in. If we can get that in correctly, lube everything up, and then go ahead and put our sealer on there and get the cases back together. It's always fun trying to remember which way everything goes back together. Now I did, just to be clear, I did already look through the service manual to make sure that all the transmission gears were going back together correctly. go. All right, now I got the transmissions in, so let me just, or transmission in. Let me get these on. Seems to shift through all the gears. So sometimes I forget this and it takes me a minute to figure it out, but basically the trick is once you've got everything lined up to get these forks in, you've got to kind of lift up on the parts of the shaft that are made to slide up and down for gear changes. A lot of times you've got to kind of lift up on them to fit your shift fork into the right position on the shift drum. So that's what I was trying to get lined up. It took me a minute to remember how to get it all done, and then obviously getting the two shafts in place and locked in makes the shift forks stay in place, or keeps them from coming off of the shift drum while you're testing it out and shifting between gears. And then to actually test to make sure that it shifts, you have to be able to twist it a little bit. The gears themselves in the transmission is the only way you can get it to allow the shift forks to slide up and down. So if you see right here, when I'm turning that shift drum, you can see the transmission sliding up and down between gears. But in order for that to work properly, you have to spin the gears at the same time. But it does go through all of the gears. So all I got to do is get this gasket maker on now, and I'll be ready to put it back together. All right, so as you can see, we've got our gasket maker on, got our crankshaft installed, transmissions installed and tested, got all of our bearings checked, cleaned, and lubricated on both cases, and we're ready to install this one. So a lot of people would just set it on here and run the original bolts back in, I guess you could say. But these Kawasaki's don't even really slide far enough down most of the time because of how much tighter they are, like I was saying earlier. So that's where, to me at least, I mean, just my opinion, this tool right here, the crank installer tool, really makes a big difference. Oh, almost missed one really important step. Almost. Did not want to forget about this little guy right here. Put some extra gasket maker around it. There we go. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing here that I did on the other one, making sure I've got both the dowel pins lined up. Just checking constantly to make sure that I'm not missing anything as I press this back together and that it's going on evenly. Not stretching just one side and not the other. All right, so unfortunately my battery died as I was finishing up pressing the cases back together, but we did end up getting it all done, and we've got the bolts torqued down properly for the two case halves. So yeah, it turned out pretty good. It looks great. The crankshaft is centered perfectly and turns pretty easily. We got some two-stroke oil now sitting inside the crankcase just to keep that, make sure that that crankshaft is absolutely lubed up enough whenever it gets its first start. And we're about to get started running all of this back together. so that's the end of the video. Just to recap, we've got the engine together, we've got vehicle compression, and we've got it in the bike now. So all we've got left to do is to reassemble the carburetor. I've already got it taken apart and cleaned. I've got a rebuild kit waiting for it. We need to get the plastics put on here. I've got some new plastics that are black with some OEM style graphics that are really going to set it off. And we've got to button up a few other things with wiring, put a new chain on it, and a new bar pad and grips. But we're really close to being done with it. Appreciate you guys sticking with me throughout that long video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.
Thank you for watching.